What's up, guys? Happy Tuesday. Welcome back to Eat, Train, Prosper. This is episode 130, our monthly Instagram Q&A for the month of October. So we have a good list of questions that came in from Bryan's followers on Instagram. So thank you to all of Bryan's followers who submitted a question. Before we jump into these, we have some updates. Bryan, can you kick us off, please?
Yeah, it's been quite a whirlwind these last few days. So, as of right now, Tuesday morning, September 26th, we are 11 days out from my bike race, which means that if we record an episode next week, when that episode comes out, I will have finished my bike race. So, that is interesting. It's come up really fast here. But kind of along the same lines of all that and just the story of my life. Last week, I talked about how I had done that 45-mile ride at race pace and ended up getting the GI distress for the next 24 hours afterward. And then that seemed to dissipate and everything went back to normal. Well, a week later, I did another really gnarly ride. I guess it was Friday, so 4 days ago. And this time it was climbing a bunch of hills, so challenging at points on this one climb that I ended up basically having to hike a bike for a quarter mile. It was essentially cobblestone boulders going at like a 30% vert or a 30-degree vert. And I just got off my bike and walked it. I was like, I'm not talented enough or technically proficient enough to make it through this. So had to walk my bike up like a quarter mile, which was, my heart rate was at like 175 the entire time. And then we proceeded to do the entire rest of the route, which was like 2,000 feet of elevation and a bunch more climbing. And I kind of felt run down going into it. I had gone for a walk with Kim before I went for that ride. And I was like, hey, I just don't I feel tired and lethargic. I don't know. I don't really want to do this. And she was like, yeah, you really shouldn't. You should listen to your body. And I was like, yeah, well, I'm probably still going to go do it. And she was like, of course you are. So I did. And then I woke up that night. I tried to go to sleep and basically was sick, had a fever, sweated through my sheets, alternating between being sweaty and having chills and being sweaty and having chills. And basically woke up Saturday morning and was effectively sick. Couldn't do anything Saturday. Same thing occurred Sunday. So for 2 straight days, 48 hours, I was basically having a fever, sweating, chills, couldn't eat, didn't do anything. Over the course of those 2 days, I got a total of 7,000 or 8,000 steps. So maybe 4,000 a day, something like that, just kind of moving around the house, and a total of 160 grams of protein. I think I got 100 one day and 60 the next day. And that was legit forced. I had no appetite. I was just forcing myself to eat whatever I could eat. So that was pretty unfortunate. But I ended up sleeping really well Sunday night and felt 97% better on Monday. I couldn't believe it. Considering how I felt Sunday, to wake up Monday feeling that good, it was really a surprise for me. And so I did a nice, easy weight workout, kept between 2 and 5 RIR on pretty much everything. And then did a nice, easy zone 2 bike ride. Didn't really let my heart rate get up into zone 3 at all. Just kind of stayed chill and, got out there and pedaled the bike a little bit. Felt great the rest of the day. And then last night slept like shit again. Couldn't get my temperature right. I don't have a fever, but I definitely don't feel back to normal, I guess, today. So I'm having these thoughts that maybe I'm slightly overreached. I can't figure out whether I was inevitably going to get sick anyways, and that this fever was, something that I just caught through Bryson or Vivi, or kind of coming back from school. School literally just started in the last 3 weeks. So it could be just new germs and stuff being passed around. Me being a little more susceptible to it, maybe because I'm slightly overreached, is a possibility as well. I acknowledge that slight overreaching is kind of what I'm trying to do, because I only have a few more days until my taper week, which is supposed to start Sunday this coming week. So basically I have 5 more days of training, and then I'm supposed to taper for the week leading up to the race. So my purpose was to slightly overreach and then overcompensate during the recovery period. But I don't exactly know if I am in fact overreached or if I'm just sick or if the two are working together and I'm a little bit of both. So yeah, kind of working through that at the moment. And then body weight has been plummeting, as you probably would expect, given that I haven't been eating and I've been sick and stuff. So yesterday I woke up and hit 182, which is the lowest I've seen on the scale in a decade. And then ate a bunch of food yesterday. So that was great. Woke up this morning, 184. So at least I gained a little bit of that back, but still pretty depleted. And yeah, I don't know. I feel very torn on the overreached / sickness thing and not exactly sure what to make of all of it, nor exactly sure how I should go about my next 5 days of training, given that I wanted to really push and sort of overreach here. But what if I already am overreached? Is it stupid to overreach more? So anyways, that's the milieu of thoughts going through my head at the moment. What's going on with you?
Well, I did have a slight input. I think it's likely a combination that, I mean, our bodies are constantly fighting viruses, or maybe not viruses, but like bacteria and different things. But it's when you're a period of overreached or overtrained or a myriad of those things where you kind of you're more susceptible to something than you otherwise would be. And that's when we do get like sick. When if you hadn't been pushing training and all these things as hard, it might have just been, you may have never even noticed it. And I do think that is something that's correlated. Like we talked about it a couple of weeks back on the podcast, right? When I had that crazy leg session with Brandon and then woke up like dog shit sick the next day. So I think it's probably that, but that was all my only input there.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you're probably right as well. I just need to kind of figure out where to take training from here for the next 5 days before the taper begins. And it's probably just going to be a bunch of auto regulation and like see how I feel today. Maybe it's zone 2, maybe it's something harder. Maybe I rest tomorrow. Maybe I don't. I don't know. But I think that whatever plan I wrote in my head of what this last week before the taper week should look like, I think at this point I need to kind of throw that out and just kind of follow auto regulation for the next few days and make sure that I don't put myself into a deeper hole.
Very, very likely. Yeah. Get body weight back up and those sorts of things. Okay, so for me, first update, I'm always very bad at this. When this episode releases, the final upgrade class of the year, that is my online coaching upgrade project that I co-run with Jackson Pios. Cart will be open for our final launch of the year. So for all the coaches out here that listen to ETP, that is an opportunity for you to upgrade your skills and coaching systems. I did post a physique update finally to my Instagram a number of days back. So I know we talked about, I believe, an episode or 2 episodes about that and doing like a side by side with which was my peak body weight when I started my 2 diets ago, which produced my best physique, and then which was 207 last week. So that one was pretty cool. That was it was eye-opening, right? Some progress had been made. And I know oftentimes it feels like, which we talk about, that at an advanced training age, that nothing really happens. You're just not really moving boulders anymore, but things can happen. It's just a large time investment to kind of see them happen, sort of thing.
Was that 2 years apart? Those shots you posted?
Yeah, more than 2 years, like March of 2021 until last week, which, September 2023. But yeah,
I mean, it was significant though. So yeah, like to your point, I mean, things do move slowly, and 2.5 years is obviously a long amount of time it's a lot longer for somebody who's just starting out and they go from nothing to 2.5 years in. And you're like, like to them, that feels like the longest 2.5 years ever. They just can't wait to get from nothing to that. But later in your journey, I mean, it's still 2.5 years. And so you look at that and it is significant. I mean, you can see very significant changes in your physique, pretty much the entire physique from the feet up to the shoulders and your abs. I mean, you're significantly more defined. You have significantly larger muscles in multiple areas. So yeah, I mean, I think you should be extremely amped about it. It's really cool.
Yeah. So I was pumped about that. Yeah. A bunch of good feedback. And then I guess I just should say there was a year in between there that I just had a which we've talked about on the podcast before. Like I just had a shit year. I botched my gaining phase, and I never really got food back up high enough and didn't increase my body weight high enough. And then when I dieted, I was like, yeah, this is worse than last year. So there was basically an an F up year in between those years as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to go 20 years of training without having a little bit of that in there, I think.
I mean, and that's, I feel like we could maybe do an episode on something like this, but after so long, and I don't want to derail us, like you have to start trying things. You start to believe your own experiences. I would say not that you start to believe them more. The weight, especially when it comes to yourself, I think is more beneficial, or you trust it more than some of the information that comes out. And sometimes you're wrong, right? Sometimes you're wrong, and sometimes like I want to gather, different perspectives and stuff. And I'm like, I'm okay with trading a year of my training or whatever to learn, and potentially there's something new that I've been fucking up this whole time. And I'm about to uncover this, incredibly green pasture of land, right? The grass may be greener. And then sometimes the grass isn't greener, and that's just the kind of nature of it. But that's kind of what I was getting at. But yeah, maybe we'll do an episode on something like that down the road.
Yeah. It's an interesting idea. I think over the course of like a training career, though, 15, 20 years, whatever it is you've been doing at this point, that you almost have to have periods of time where you are stagnant or maybe even moving slightly backwards, because you can't always be moving forwards. And the analogy or metaphor that I would make here would be, you build intensity week to week over the course of a mesocycle, and then intensity is too high, and eventually you have to like deload, flush fatigue. And in a sense, what you're doing is you're moving backwards so that you can move forwards. And I think on a larger scale, that's sort of what that year was for you. It's not that it's a failed year where you made mistakes and blah, 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 but maybe it was just like a necessary reprieve or hesitation in the forward momentum. And it allowed you to kind of get where you are now. So anyway, there's a few different ways of looking at that.
I really, really like how you put that. And that takes me into my last update, is that I had another one of those acute fatigue buildup things. And I took today off. I did nothing, no cardio, no sauna, nothing. And I will do that tomorrow as well, and then see how I feel going into Thursday. But I find like it ramps up on me really, really fast. Like I'm going great. Things are awesome. I'm pushing. And I'll realize like, oh, man, I really don't want to go train today, but I'll go. Maybe since I do train earlier, sometimes when that happens, that's when I'll get like some pre-workout or something like that. Like there's a shop that I can like buy a pre-workout, like a single serve, and I'll do it. And then I'll have like an amazing training session. I'm like, see, we were tired, but we just had to get there, get moving, and things worked out great. But then like that will turn on me, and it did turn on me. And I had to like, you know what? I do not want to be here. I'm really, really low energy. I'm like trying to get through it. And that happened where I was like, whoa, I'm like super fatigued. My weight cratered off another 2 pounds. So like we had like a 2.5 pound drop from last week to this week's check-in. And then my weight these past 2 mornings has been another 2 pounds down over the average from, this check-in I just submit. So like my hunger hasn't been, really any higher, but I was like, something's going on. So I just need to like chill the fuck out and let my body kind of do its thing and sort some stuff out. Mm. So like you said, like you do need those periods, and they will kind of catch up on you in different times.
Yeah. Like we were kind of saying off air before we started, you and I both are flirting with this boundary of being a bit overreached at the moment, and in different ways, of course, different modality, but kind of same idea. And it brings me back to the notion of the psychological need to deload, which I feel like comes up all the time now. But like me going into that bike ride on Friday, I didn't really want to do it. I was telling Kim I didn't really want to do it. And then I went and did it anyways. And then I got really sick. And so it kind of seems like the psychology or the mental side will tell you before your physical side tells you oftentimes.
I agree with that 100%. I feel like it's hard though, because it's a fine line, because like for example, the reason this is top of mind, because whatever. The David Goggins mindset, right? He had a really funny Instagram post today that I would watch like 6 times, which is why I thought about it. But like, there's many times where your body's ready to perform, and it's just like that inner bitch that he calls it. That's like, no, I deserve a rest day, or like, and it's hard to gauge like whether it's just me being mentally weak, or like my body's like, no, dude, you need to fucking pump the brakes sort of thing. And what I now err on the side of is like, I will squash that inner bitch, right? Until something kind of not necessarily bad happens, but until I know I'm like, no, this is not productive. My numbers have regressed, like it's time sort of thing. But I just did want to put that up there because it's a fine line, and it's hard to identify it until you've spent, time on both sides of that fine line.
Yeah. And you also, like, there have been many times where I have not wanted to do something and done it and not gotten sick and ended up having a great workout and then continued progressing forward from there. And so you really just don't know. And I guess just a continual learning process.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. So real quick, before we jump into the questions, I should also probably do a little advertising here and remind everyone that Bryan's program starts a new cycle on October 9th. So that'll be right after my bike race. October 9th, we'll start back to a split routine. I am in the process of designing it, and I should be able to talk more about that next week, assuming we have an episode. My wife leaves for Paris tomorrow, so she will be gone next week, but I think we're going to try and sneak in an episode. So yeah, that starts October 9th, and I will discuss that more next week.
Wonderful. Let's kick off this first question over to you to start off, if you're okay with that.
Yep.
Under what circumstances will training 5 times per week get better results than 4 times per week for hypertrophy?
Yeah, my first inclination when reading this question was just if you need to do so much volume that you need to split it over a 5th day. So maybe you say are at a point in your journey where you feel like you can handle 2 hours of training 4 days a week, but 2 hours is just way too much of a time commitment for you. And if you do it over 5 days, then you can do an hour and a half each session. And that seems much more reasonable for you. And so you then can split it over 5 days and get the same amount of volume in a better way that's more conducive to you and your lifestyle. So that would be one main reason that I'd think of. Another would be like maybe you're doing some sort of specialization phase and you have, say, 4 days that are like upper, lower. And then you do a 5th day that's more focused on the area you're trying to bring up or something along those lines. But in most cases, when comparing 1-to-1 and you're like, hey, I'm going to train with the same volume and I'm either going to split it 5 times a week or 4 times a week with, the same intensity and everything else static, I don't really see 5 times a week necessarily being any better than 4 times a week. What about you?
I agree with that. The time commitment, I think, is the kicker there. And if you find that mentally, if you can't handle a 2-hour training session, or you're gonna, half-ass those final 2 exercises or something like that, I think that's a great time to split it off. If you're someone who just has the time in your schedule, like if you're single and you don't have a family commitment or whatever, and like you spend that 3rd rest day kind of like with nothing to do, like that's a day I'll put it in there. Okay, let's go to the gym. Like maybe we'll add some extra volume sort of thing. But it really, if volume is equated and you're able to keep that same intensity at those volumes deeper into those training sessions, and you're able to mentally stay in it, I don't see any real reason that 5 days is inherently better. I do find, however, personally, and with most clients, when we do push it off into that 5th day.
Yeah, I mean, I think 5 days is probably the most normal amount of training days for somebody that really cares about getting optimal results. And that's not that 5 is better than 4. It's just that oftentimes 6 is too much and 5 is just right. So yeah, I mean, there's really no science there. But I think you just, you figure out how much volume you need for each body part and for your system as a whole. And then you figure out how to best split that across the week or the microcycle or whatever. And sometimes it might be 5 days, or in my case, I love 5 out of 8 days or 6 out of 10 days or something like that. And so it doesn't have to be on a weekly basis as well.
Yeah. This one I will kick over to you because it's directly for you. How do you plan on dialing back cardio without losing fitness after the race?
Yeah, there have been a lot of questions today that are similar to this, where they're specific to me. So hopefully that's somewhat educational for you guys. But regarding this question specifically, how will I dial back cardio without losing fitness? I think it's important to remember that cardio adaptations and hypertrophy adaptations or strength adaptations, the maintenance volume it's low. I mean, the same is for cardio. I don't know that the research is, I haven't seen research that says it's 33%, but I've heard enough really high level endurance athletes discuss going into maintenance phases and talking about reducing their volume 50% or more and not losing fitness per se. So the thing with cardiovascular endurance is that the zone 2 adaptations, like the kind of long endurance aerobic stuff where you're at submaximal efforts, those don't go away. It takes weeks and months for those to dissipate. So maybe you can think of that as like the actual myofibrillar muscle that you have in your body, if your pursuit is hypertrophy. And maybe you can look at the higher intensity stuff and like your max effort VO2 max intervals, kind of like it's not as fast as the way that glycogen dissipates out of your muscles, but it does happen a lot faster. So I think what most people will expect when they dial back volume after something like this in cardio is that they will expect that their low level endurance doesn't really go anywhere, and that will stay for a number of months. Even with really low training, like 2 or 3 times a week of zone 2, you can maintain pretty much all of the adaptations that you got doing it 5 or 6 days a week. But that high intensity, max effort, VO2 max type stuff, like say 1 to 6 minutes as hard as you can go, that goes really quickly, like in a matter of a week or 2 weeks. And so I am at the point where I sort of expect some of that to go. And I'm okay with that because it also comes back really fast, which is very similar to hypertrophy in many ways too. Like as soon as you begin training again and eating carbs and stuff, like your muscles will fill back up with glycogen and, you're suddenly a superhero again. So the other consideration here is that I still am planning on having Mike T do my cardio programming once we get to late October here. And I don't know for sure, but my assumption is, or at least I'm going to hope that we can fit cardio in about 4 times a week. That's kind of my goal. And I assume that within those 4 sessions, there'll probably be 2 higher intensity VO2 max type sessions, because that's more or less why Mike wanted to work with me, was to help me with that aspect of the training, as it seems that I'm doing fine on the zone 2 kind of aerobic adaptation side. So I don't know exactly how the answer to this question, but I think that just keeping in mind that aerobic adaptations stay for a long time and that VO2 max adaptations do not, but they come back quickly. All of that is kind of good information to have, and I'm not really too stressed about it in either regard. I'm going to kick this one over to you because it's one where I think we both can have some input here. So what do you guys eat in a typical day?
So let me preface this first with this, I feel, very important disclaimer that nutrition is my profession, right? In the same way that, whoever is listening to this, that your profession, you are probably not overly excited in those things about. That is me with nutrition, right? I eat the same thing every single day. I have 1 meal per week that varies from that. The primary reason is I am chasing a very lofty goal. And like we talked about, being an advanced, natural trainee, I'm throwing everything I possibly can at that and reducing variables, right? So keep that in mind. Breakfast, eggs, egg whites. I go 2 eggs, 200 grams egg whites, about 115 grams of rye toast, 1 kiwi, and 80 grams of pineapple. And 50 grams of spinach, right? With some hot sauce. That's my fancy meal for the day. Second, I have a protein vegetable meal, chicken breast and bell peppers. And that is so that I can stack my other carbohydrates closer to my training window. The first meal there is Rice Krispies cereal. It's a puffed rice cereal, very low in sugar, very, very straightforward, very easily digestible, 30 grams a whey, and about 80 to 100 grams of banana. I have a drink here called Pocari Sweat. pretty much like a very low electrolytes and dextrose flavored drink. It's intra-workout carbohydrate, provides me 36 grams of carbs intra-workout. Post-workout, I have another Rice Krispies and whey, but without the banana, the same thing there. And then I will have a chicken breast, jasmine rice, and green vegetables meal as my post-workout. And then I have a final meal of tuna steak, and another fat source, which is typically going to be some like 6 grams of EVOO on top, extra virgin olive oil, or the occasional avocado. And then one time per week, I have sushi.
Well, mine is going to seem much more erratic compared to the consistency of yours. But yeah, I've talked about this on the podcast a lot because I am just trying to eat as much food as I can right now, given the amount of exercise that I'm doing. And so what I'm eating now probably will not look like what I'm going to eat a few weeks from now if we were to do this again. But I pretty much start most days with 60 grams of whey and Gatorade powder and element electrolyte drink. And that is whether I'm going for a bike ride in the morning or lifting in the morning. I pretty much just have the same thing. And that gets me my protein and carbs that I need to fuel whatever workout I'm doing. When I finish whatever the morning workout is, I'll usually then embark on 6 to 8 ounces of meat, a handful of almonds, bunch of whole grain, like 21 grain bread from Dave's Killer Bread. I love that stuff. So I'll have a bunch of that. The number of pieces is somewhere between 1 and 4, depending on how hard I worked and how many calories and carbs I feel like I need. A couple hours after that, I'll usually have a protein bar of some sort with a couple more almonds, a bunch of fruit, and a few EPA fish oil pills. I got my blood work done a number of months ago, and it showed that my DHA was great. It was actually high, but my EPA was a little bit low. And so I went out and bought a specific from Nordic Naturals, a fish oil that's EPA dominant. So it's like a 5-to-1 EPA to DHA, I think. And so I've been taking that 3 capsules a day to bring the EPA up. So that would be like my 3rd feeding of the day. And then the 4th one is usually some sort of snacking. Like the kids will come home from school and they'll ask me to make like pancakes or crepes or French toast or something kind of carby with a little bit of protein in it, some eggs, something like that. So I'll usually eat something like that around 4 p.m. And then dinner is another 6 to 8 ounces of meat, a bunch of fruit, veggies, and as many carbs as I can fit in my body, whether that's more like Dave's Killer Bread or rice or potatoes, cereal. I have like a high fiber Raisin Bran that I love. So I get a bunch of carbs from that because there's, a bunch of sugar and raisins and stuff like that. So it's usually something like that. And then oftentimes that meal, is at 6:30. Oftentimes by 9 p.m., I'm getting ready for bed and I'm like, oh man, I'm still hungry. I need more food. And then I'll run to the fridge and have a perfect bar and a piece of fruit or something like that, or a yogurt. So it's kind of all over the place, but I'm just trying to eat as much as I can. And it usually comes down to eating something every 2 to 3 hours throughout the day. And I'm trying to get protein and carbohydrates in each one of those.
I'm sure that those were very non-sexy answers for what that person was expecting.
Yeah, exactly. No, I just have milkshakes all day. Oh, and then I should probably mention that 3 or 4 times a week during this escalation of my cardiovascular work, I have been baking. So that could be brownies, banana breads, cookies, whatever. So yeah, whatever I can eat really. Okay. Next question is, I'll come over to you because I think this is a good one for you to start with as well. Do you think life stress can have much effect on building muscle? What are good training arrangements to counteract?
This is a really good question. So yes, life stress can have much effect on building muscle because life stress, right? And whether that's emotional stress, psychological stress, physical stress, any kind of manifestation of stress. Stress is a catabolic stress, which is, primarily cortisol in the body. That is a catabolic hormone. Muscle building is anabolic, right? So catabolism and anabolism are opposite ends of the spectrum. Also, typically we have testosterone, which is, very correlated with anabolism, and cortisol are inversely related. So typically when we have higher testosterone, we have lower cortisol, and then vice versa. So do I think that life stress can have much effect on building muscle? That answer is yes, because if stressors are high enough, right, your desire to train will be lower. Your adaptations to that training will be lower. Your recovery capacity and all these other positively correlated factors with hypertrophy and anabolism will be impacted. And now into the second part of the question, what are good training arrangements to counteract? I would probably say reduce your training so that your overall, stress load comes down, but there's no split to improve the, compounding life stressors of people dying and a divorce and all these other things. Like you can't intelligently split your way around that. You need to either reduce these stressors significantly or exogenously increase your anabolism to put a giant Band-Aid on it, sort of thing.
Yeah, I agree 100% with all of that. And I was going to use the cortisol buckets thing that you mentioned as well. I think that was really well said. You mentioned divorce and another really big one. And so I would say that this also can be represented in something like you're in college and you're studying for final exams or midterms, or like it doesn't have to be as dramatic as, you're getting a divorce or someone in your family dies or something like that. I mean, stresses have the way stress impacts you is very individual. And there could be a divorce or a death that doesn't impact someone very much at all. And someone else could be really impacted by the stress of midterms or final exams. And so being able to kind of ascertain what that impact of the stress is on you is really important. And so you look at my situation, and the stress that I had was just working out too much. It was trying to combine cardio and weights. And at the time, a number of months ago, I was training 4 or 5 times a week. I was on a split routine. So I was trying to lift 4 or 5 times a week as well as do cardio, 5 or 6 times a week. And that bucket of stress was too much for me. And so the training arrangement that I changed was to go to a full body routine where I would do 3 sessions over 9 days. So I was basically hitting a session every 3 days. And that actually solved my problem for a number of weeks. And I would say if it hadn't been for me getting sick and breaching on overreaching here, as we've been discussing in this episode, I would say that solved the problem completely. But it's possible that now it's rearing its ugly head again, and maybe it solved it temporarily. And now I need to make some additional changes to compensate for that as I'm going deeper and deeper into this. And so stress is not static. Stress changes. Stress can grow over time. Stress can decrease over time from the same stimulus. It's cumulative. And so, yeah, I agree with Aaron that there just isn't like a single training arrangement that's going to solve the problem. But the overriding precedent is that you just have to do less, because if you have less recovery, then you have less ability to make gains. And any work that you're doing is causing stress and not making gains for you. It's not allowing you to make gains. And so finding the dose of training that's going to allow you to continue progressing despite the stress is the right dose. And how that's arranged, I don't think fully matters, whether it's, switching to a 2 or 3 times a week full body, or doing a bro split where maybe you're only in the gym for 40 minutes a session, but you're still going 5 times a week. There's a number of different ways you can kind of manipulate that. But at the end of the day, you have to find a training load that allows you to continue progressing despite the stress that you're under.
The last thing I will add onto the back end of that one is you can improve your reaction in your subjective perception of stress. So that is one that like Bryan did mention, that we all, perceive stressors and manage them differently. There's your people who are like super high strung, where if like something bad happens, they crumble. And then there's other people who have so much shit on their plate and they are just like trucking. Like I have a client right now, we're actually wrapping up. He has so much on his plate and we have swam through this fat loss phase, and he'll submit his check and be like, it wasn't the best week. I had like these things happen, but he'd still be down like 1.8 pounds on average. And I have to pull back and be like, dude, come on, like cut yourself some fucking slack here. But with so much on his plate, and then there's other people where they don't have a lot on their plate and like they stub their toe and they're like, I had to go get Chipotle, 4 times this week because I stubbed my toe and I couldn't handle the stress of the toe stubbing. So it is very, very individualistic, but you can improve it. And it's through generally like your reactions and perceptions of things.
Yep. Totally well said.
Sorry, I didn't mean to mute myself. Okay, next one is for you, Bryan. Does target heart rate for zone 2 decrease when you're in a deficit compared to maintenance?
So I don't think so, but I do acknowledge that when you lose body weight or go into a caloric deficit, your heart rate decreases. I would specifically state that your resting heart rate decreases, but I don't believe that changes your zone 2 target heart rate, because just because you're in a deficit, it shouldn't change your max heart rate, which means that zone 2 being a percentage of max heart rate or a percentage of effort of max heart rate should, in my opinion, be mostly the same. Now, I think it is important to remember that zone 2 is a range. And so like in my program or in my app, my zone 2 range is 132 to 144. And I use that entire range. And it's not a matter of necessarily whether I'm in a deficit or not. It's more rate of perceived exertion subjectively on a given day. And some days, the heart rate is it's sporadic. So some days I can go out and I feel like my RPE feels like I'm in zone 2, and it's all the things, the signs that I'm looking for. And I can ride it 140 to 144 and just sustain that and feel really good. And then other days, I'm riding at 140 to 144 and I feel like I'm in zone 3 and it feels really hard. And so I'll dial it back and I'll go to 132 to 138, and that will be my zone 2 for the day. And so I think just remembering that it is a range and that where you fall in that range is variable. I don't think it depends on whether you're in a deficit or not as much as just day-to-day variation.
Very, very well put. Yeah, that was going to be my thought, is that I don't know definitively, but I would say it's not something that I think is worth trying to reconfigure because you're in a 20% calorie deficit or something.
Yeah, I know it affects resting heart rate, as I've seen that go down amongst me and my clients when we're in a deficit, but I've never seen it affect maximum heart rate. And so I just don't see that would then impact zone 2 down the line.
Yeah. Okay, this next one we will kick over to you as well. I'm interested in your answer to this one. Optimal way to start programming integrated partials into a specialization cycle for hypertrophy.
Yeah, I'm going to assume with this question that this person has not been using integrated partials prior, because I think that if you've been using them prior to embarking on this specialization cycle, then there's no reason to worry about how to start programming them. You just keep doing what you're doing and maybe ramp it up a little bit. But for someone that's brand new to integrated partials and looking to kind of begin integrating them into their programming, maybe we should actually talk about what an integrated partial is first. So it's essentially like a 1 1/4 rep where the quarter is done at the bottom. So think of like a hack squat or a back squat. You would go down to the bottom, ass to grass. You would come back up to parallel or just above parallel, and then you would go right back down again. And then you would come all the way up, and that would count as 1 rep. So that's how it would look on a movement like a squat pattern. On a movement like a pull down, it would just be the opposite, where you would do a 1/4 rep at the top stretched position, and then you would do a full rep, down to your chest or whatever you deem full range of motion to be, and that would count as 1 rep as well. So that would be integrated partials. Now, as far as including them into a specialization cycle, if you haven't been using them before at all, then I would literally just start using them by doing a 1 1/4 rep. So the new thing that a lot of people have been doing is multiple integrated partials and then one full rep. So you'll see someone be like, I'm doing a cable lateral raise and I'll do like 3 pulses at the bottom where you're getting like, 5 to 7 inches of range of motion. And then you'll come back and then 5 to 7 inches of range of motion and back. And you'll do that for 2 or 3 reps. And then you'll do a full rep. And then you'll come right back down and do 3 more little pulses at the bottom. And so I would call that like a triple integrated partial type thing. I'm not exactly sure what the terminology would be, but I think you could use that as a progression in your specialization cycle. So you could start, say, week 1, maybe you don't use any integrated partials or you just do 1, right? And then in week 2, and maybe it's the same, or you add 1 integrated partial. Week 3 and week 4, maybe you, between those 2 weeks, you add another one. And maybe by the end of the meso, you're doing a triple partial at the bottom into a full rep. Another thing you can do is do the bottom partials where you don't actually even do a full rep. So that could be even another progression where you just choose a heavier weight, potentially, depending on the movement, and you just stay in that bottom range. So you stay in that, say, bottom 50% range, and you just do your reps there. But since this question specifically asked about using the integrated partials, I think the best way that I would do it would be just to start with regular full range of motion, or start with 1 integrated partial and then a full rep. And then over the course of the mesocycle, increase the number of little pulses at the bottom between each full rep. And that way you're spending more time relatively in that lengthened position. What do you think?
I have nothing to add on to the back of that one. I think that was a wonderful explanation.
Cool. You want to take a stab at this one first? I'll send it over to you and then I'll finish up here.
Let's do that.
Can a full body program be optimal for hypertrophy, or is a split better, and why?
So I think to answer this question well, we need to provide a little bit more of like a circumstance, right? Some specific wording in here I think is important. Can a full body program be optimal for hypertrophy? I think if you have 2 or 3 days per week or sessions per week that you can hit, yes, I do think that a full body program within those limited 2 or 3 sessions is optimal for your given circumstance. If you are talking about like, if you are someone who are like, no, I have as much time in the world as I need, I can train 5 days per week, is it optimal here? I am going to say no. And what I think is really, maybe ironic is a proper term, is I know some people who are like these massive proponents of full body training, and they'll say like, this is the best way to train. This is the best way to build the best muscle or the most muscle, which I find is rather ironic because we have this massive, body of evidence of bodybuilders, both natural, enhanced, and all these things. And you find very, very, very few of them actually train a full body split. And that's something that I've always find kind of, like I said, ironic with some of this terminology that people will use, is the people with the best physiques that have the most hypertrophy typically are not following full body routines.
Yeah, agree begrudgingly, because my rose-colored glasses I romanticize the pre-steroid era, would be a way of saying that. I mean, I've discussed this on the podcast a lot, how I got my start training 3 times a week full body, and I got tremendous results from it and found it extremely conducive to being a teenager and lifting. But I think it's important not to conflate what's optimal as a teenager when you're playing basketball 12 hours a week and also trying to go to parties and holler at girls and all that stuff with what is optimal, right? And so, yeah, I do tend to agree, at least anecdotally, that the majority of people do use split routines. Part of me does question, at least to play devil's advocate, whether that's because full body routines are just really, really, really hard. And if it's equal, like just to throw a hypothetical out there, say it's equal results for hypertrophy, whether you're doing a 3 times a week full body or a 5 times a week body part split, it's harder to do the full body. I mean, it's mentally challenging. It's physically exhausting. And I think that if you would have asked me a couple years ago, I would have said that it probably was even 1-to-1. And the thing I would have leaned on in defending that would have been research on frequency and the benefits of training muscle groups multiple times a week. But in the last couple of years, research has pretty much written frequency off, and only really as a means of splitting volume in the most optimal way. And so I don't really see a place where optimal volume split would require someone to do it over a 3-day full body program versus doing it over a split routine. Anecdotally, I also think that most people that have been in the game for a while just can't recover muscle groups for full body programs in time. So if you're training 3 days a week, how are you going to organize your program so that you have a leg hip movement on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday? Or do you? And if you don't, then is that now like kind of a split routine? So yeah, I think there's just a number of questions and variables in there. And my guess is that the later you get in your training journey, probably the more advantageous it is to do some sort of split routine, as that is also more conducive to creating specialization, which seems to be something that's important as you get further along into the journey as well. And so I do think you can get great results doing full body. I mean, like I said, when you look back at the pre-steroid era in the 40s, 50s, early 60s, before the steroids became much more prominent, that's how people trained. Like Reg Park and John Grimmick and Steve Reeves, like all of them were on 3 times a week full body routines, and they have some of the best natural physiques that we've seen. So it works. It's a different time, and there's probably a slightly better twist to this thing if you go split routine at this point, I would say, although I'm not like 100% confident in that.
It's a hard question. Like we kind of have our prejudices. I one thing that you didn't say actually that I did want to make sure I see. I think the full body program, like let's say again, you said 3 times per week. Optimal hypertrophy 3 times per week. You know, if you're like a novice or something, like yes, but let's say we're talking like trying to maximize your physique, right? Like we're 8 years in. I don't know if 3 times per week is just enough volume, unless you're going to have those massively long days.
Well, yeah. So but when you look at Steve Reeves programming or Reg Park, John Grimmick, like those guys, they were doing between 4 and 7 or 8 sets per body part per session. Steve Reeves sessions were known to be over 2 hours long and doing his full body. Yeah. And so when you're talking about that, I mean, if you're getting 15 to 20 sets weekly, then you're right in that range of optimal volume. And then I guess one thing we failed to mention as well is that then you have people like Menno that do full body training 7 days a week. And so in Menno's approach, he's doing 2 sets per muscle group per day. And so he's getting 14 sets per muscle group per week, which is, again, right in that sweet spot range. And Menno's jacked. I mean, I don't know if Menno is the most jacked person ever, or if he would be more jacked if he did a split routine. Like we couldn't possibly know. But he's been training that way for a really long time, and he's won some bodybuilding competitions, and he's a very highly respected coach. And he has almost all of his students training in this high frequency full body training style as well. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm sure a lot of it probably depends on the person as well. It depends on how you organize your training. Like he must have a lot of focus on short movements, lengthened movements, like where he places them, how much damage he's creating. There's a repeated bout effect. So over the course of time, he's going to get less sore and less damage from doing the same thing. I mean, there's so many factors. I don't really feel super confident saying one for sure, but I just find myself leaning toward the split routine.
Yeah. The last thing I will say that I wanted to bring up first, that you did bring up the second time, is I think the full body routine, it requires a higher level of intelligence to program very, very well. Yeah. Because you can't just be like, I hear people like, oh, just pick a movement for each body part and do it per day. And I'm like, okay, Monday, back squat, Tuesday, leg press, Wednesday, hack squat. Like you're going to be a fucking mess. Yeah. You know what I mean? You can't just do that. So it does require and a more intelligent understanding of program design. Okay, so this one will kick over to you to start. Can you discuss merits of doing 4 sets of one exercise versus 2 sets of 2 different exercises for hypertrophy? Is there a time and a place for both?
Yeah, my gut reaction here was to say that I think doing multiple different exercises is probably better for hypertrophy, and doing multiple sets of the same exercise is probably slightly better for strength. And my rationale for that would be that you are able to hit the muscle from different angles. And so even if somebody was saying, well, I'm going to do 4 sets of a different exercise on my second training day for the week. So say it's like bench press one day and then cable crossovers on the other day or something like that. My response to that would still be, well, you could do 2 sets of 2 different exercises on one day and then 2 sets of 2 other different exercises on another day. And now you're hitting the muscles from 4 different angles instead of just 2 different angles. And so that's my first inclination. But I will say that the downside that I've personally experienced from doing the multiple different exercises is that you have to warm each one up, and that adds time to your workout. And if you're in a commercial gym, that requires you to move between multiple different pieces of equipment, which may or may not be available when you want them to be available. And so I think, at the end of the day, you're probably just grasping at straws, and working hard on either format is probably going to lead to pretty damn good results. It also made me think of the guys out in the UK, like AJ Morris and JP. And those guys pretty much follow a routine where they might do 6 to 10 sets for a muscle group. I mean, I'll call it 6 in a session, but they're doing it, say, twice a week or something like that. But they might do 6 working sets, and have it be across 6 different exercises. Like I've seen some of AJ Morris's stuff, and he'll have a quad day that's like 1 set of each: hack squat, leg extension, Smith squat, single leg press, I don't know, split squat. Like, I don't know, something like that. Like 1 set of 5 different movements instead of 2 or 3 sets of 2 or 3 different movements. And so that seems to work really well for them. But again, those guys are professional bodybuilders. They literally live in the gym and they coach in the gym. And so they're there all the time. And so I don't think that they're too worried about the additional time commitment there. So anyway, my initial thoughts. What do you think?
Yeah, I like that you came at it from a different angle, essentially saying that, yes, there is a time and a place for both, your time commitment, those sorts of things being one. One where I would say that maybe is if you are limited in gym equipment. Let's say your gym has like one really good chest machine and then like shitty dumbbells, and you don't want to do like a barbell bench press and there's no Smith machine. Yeah, maybe that 4 sets on that single chest press machine that fits your anthropometrics really well, you get a great stimulus. Like, yeah, I would run that into the ground as opposed to then trying to go use something else that's like far less good. Conversely, if you train at one of these like mega gyms that has all the best equipment in the world, yeah, you can probably like change your joint or sorry, your like muscle group vector from a different machine and then get another really, really good stimulus there. So I think the circumstances of your time, the training environment that you're in or gym that you're in, the equipment available are probably play a much larger role in the decision making than just 4 sets on 1 or 2 on 2.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good caveat as well. All right, what's next?
This one is for you as
me.
well.
Yeah.
What are you looking forward to post race? More strength work, less carbs. Less carbs.
Honestly, at this point, there isn't anything specific that I'm looking forward to. I'm actually, if I were to say anything, I would say that I'm actually leaning on the side of being slightly depressed at the thought of being done with the race. Like, it's been this thing just hanging over my head positively, but this thing that I've been training for and looking forward to and using as a catalyst to improve my endurance. And at least at this point, I'm not looking forward to not biking as much. I know that will change once the weather changes because as I've discussed, I cannot stand biking on the trainer inside. But as the weather continues to be nice, I still find myself literally looking forward to going out and getting on my bike every day that I do it. And so I don't know 100% how I'm going to feel post race. I had coffee with a chick named Whitney Kalos Taylor. She's awesome. She's a hybrid athlete and coach. She does mountain biking, marathons, strength training, stuff like that. But we were talking and she had a post on Instagram the other day about post her race that she had been training for, and talked about the post race blues, on how you've had all this motivation and this focus that's manufactured through this desire to either beat other people or beat yourself or exceed your own expectations or whatever it is. And that when the race ends, then you're kind of left there twiddling your thumbs like, okay, why am I doing all of this now? And so I really, at this point, honestly cannot tell you how I'm going to feel about any of it. I really just enjoy getting out on my bike and being outside, and I'm not really looking forward to not doing that anymore. So I'm sure that this will have more clarity and I can expand on this question with a little bit more breadth after the race. So that's the answer.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think that's like the athlete kind of dilemma, or like the pro athlete dilemma or something like that. There's like a definitive phenomenon, which you just described there. I just don't know the name.
All right. Well, this one, Aaron, have you experienced knees shaking during leg extensions? This person specifically is asking about the short position to the beginning of the eccentric.
Oh, yes. This is a thing for sure. Yeah, I wouldn't be concerned. It's like terminal knee extension when you're fighting to keep the knee straight, and then when you're trying to like lower it under control, like you'll get that kind of weird firing patterns of things shaking. Yes, I would say that's normal.
So I also think it's normal, but the description of it being at the short position to the beginning of the eccentric is not exactly where I experience it. I tend to experience it from the bottom lengthened position as I begin pressing into the concentric. So it's like in the bottom half of the range of motion. Mm-hmm. And then once I get to the top, to the short position, things sort of seem to stabilize. And then even the beginning of the eccentric isn't too bad for me. It's really that bottom portion as I press into the concentric. So I also agree that I think shaking on leg extensions is completely normal. And I've had a number of people comment and DM me when they notice my knees shaking in my videos and being like, oh yeah, my knees do the same thing. That's wild. Like I thought that was weird, but I guess it's normal. And I've heard this enough times that I just don't even think about it anymore. It's just, certain motor units are being exhausted and other motor units are having to jump in and begin working. And so I think that's just a bit of that happening.
Yeah. Okay. Now this next one is for you again, how to balance cardio for when we, which we is being the proverbial Bryan's program, go back to a split routine.
Yeah. So as far as balancing cardio when we go back to a split routine, I almost would refer back to question number 2, which was how do you plan on dialing back cardio without losing fitness after the race? And it's kind of the same answer. It's basically going to switch to a 3 to 4 times a week cardio. It's going to fit with the split routine. If you were following Bryan's program before we switched to a full body program, it's going to be a similar setup where we have a 4 or 5 times a week split routine for lifting. And then the cardio is going to fit in between those sessions. So probably not doing high intensity cardio directly after leg days, but probably not having a huge concern about where we fit our zone 2 work in. So that could be after a lifting session on an off day, not really too concerned about it. It should be mostly non-fatiguing. And then just being really conscious about where we place the higher intensity cardio efforts to make sure that they're as far away from leg days as possible. Basically going back to a lot of the principles that I discussed before I even got into all this cardio, where I expressed, concern about where we place different cardios to optimize the response to the hypertrophy work. And it's just going to go kind of right back to that, where I'm going to be a little bit more cognizant of that. I've definitely been surprised at how little negative impact I've noticed from doing cardio of any variety around my training, whether it's doing HIIT work the day before a leg session or the day after a leg session. It really hasn't seemed to affect me too much. But I do think that if we're looking at this from an optimality standpoint, that there are certain tweaks that can be made. And I think that where we place the cardio in the spectrum of the week is probably the main thing to consider there. This question, man, I'm not even 100% sure how to answer it. So I'm just going to read it and we can both kind of theorize. But how does the pressing angle change relative to the sternum rib cage for pecs? And so my first inclination reading this was just that if you're looking to target the clavicular pec or the upper pec, then you're going to press at an angle that is more upwards line in relation to your sternum rib cage. If you're looking to prioritize the costal pec or lower pec, then you would press more at a downward angle in relation to the sternum rib cage. And for more of that sternal or middle pec, you would press more or less in a straight line. But I think what this person is asking is more about like how that might change based on different sternum rib cage size. Do you have any thoughts on the interpretation of the question or the answer?
I mean, honestly, I was going to kind of get your thoughts on it. I'm not like, I know enough to be dangerous to talk around this sort of thing, obviously from the time spent at N1 and learning that stuff, but I feel like I just don't quite understand the question.
Yeah, I kind of am with you. So I answered it initially with gut reaction first, and then the last thing I'll say on it before we move to the final question is that I know that the size and placement of your rib cage is individual. And like Cass told me a number of years ago, and I've always kind of operated on this, that for me, with the way that my rib cage and sternum are in my torso, that when I do a flat dumbbell press, it acts more like an incline press in that my upper pec or clavicular pec is doing a bit more of the work. Whereas somebody with, I think, a lower set or smaller rib cage would find that a flat press is more costal or sternal pec, a lower or mid pec. And so I don't know enough about individual sternum rib cage sets in their chest cage per se to speak really intelligently or specifically about it. And so I'm just going to kind of leave it at that and say that this person should probably refer this question to Cass the next time he does a Q&A on his story.
Yeah, nice punt there.
Thanks.
All right. Greater fatigue to stimulus ratio going from 1 to 2 RIR to 0 RIR for isolations versus compounds.
Yeah, I love this question. I think it's a good question. I think it's somewhat obvious, but it's still a good question, a good thought experiment. So I don't see almost any fatigue accumulation going from 1 to 2 RIR to 0 on an isolation movement, especially a short overloaded one, like when we're talking about, a facing in cable curl or a tricep push down or a dumbbell lateral raise or something like that. I honestly, at this point, almost can't imagine doing a set of those movements not to failure. It just feels like 1 to 2 RIR. Why wouldn't you do 1 or 2 more reps? Because there's such a little fatigue cost associated with that. But it does feel significant when you go from 1 to 2 RIR to 0 RIR for something like a hack squat or an RDL. And so I find that just to be somewhat intuitive. And I'm not sure if I'm darting the question or not diving deep enough into it, but that's my initial thought. And maybe I'll have something else to say after you go.
Yeah. I mean, pretty much going the stimulus or the change in the fatigue to stimulus ratio. I would say the stimulus it's obviously a little bit increase in stimulus, obviously training to 0, which we know or can speculate off of that recent work by some of the data-driven strength guys. But for like Bryan said, a short overload isolation movement, bicep curl, tricep extension, lateral raise, like there's the fatigue increase is very that would happen is very, very easily mitigated by like another 20 or 30 seconds of rest. It's quite small. Using that same example, Bryan then said, but the difference with like a hack squat or something like that is actually loaded. We have multiple of the largest muscle groups in your body working together at close or at failure or near failure. Like that fatigue cost skyrockets. And that's just not 20 seconds of rest. I mean, that's your heart rate jumping an extra 20, 30 beats per minute. That's your CNS system, like sending you signals that something is wrong. And the thing that I wanted to add on to the back of this one that I think is important, the stimulus to fatigue ratio, which is something that I believe Dr. Mike popularized. Like, at least for me, that's the first person I really heard talking about it. I think the same effect is there, but the magnitude is significantly greater once we get into like your stronger populations moving a lot more load. For example, if you are, let's take ourselves, right? 18-year-old Bryan, who's 200 pounds or 180 pounds or whatever, maybe even a little bit younger. And you're like, hey, you have a 20 rep set on the leg press, at a weight that you could do a 20 rep set for. It's going to be challenging. That fatigue is going to be high, but you're not that strong yet. What you take that same, body weight in your 20, you're 28 now or whatever, and you're significantly stronger, and you do that same thing, it is a worlds different in the fatigue that you can create because you're so much stronger. Mm-hmm. And I think that is a concept of the stimulus to fatigue ratio that it's a caveat that doesn't get talked about. But like that fatigue or that fatigue, skyrockets in people that are really, really strong. Like if you were to take a power lifter, like they do with Dr. Mike in some of those videos, they bring power lifters in and they do a bodybuilding workout. And these people are so strong that they can put 4 plates on the pendulum or like 6 plates per side on the hack squat. And that load buries them because of the strength that they have.
Yeah. No, really well said. Good points there. I think 2 things to add on to that would be that as your training age increases, you're not just stronger, but you also learn how to push yourself to failure better. And so where you may have stopped that set at 18-year-old Bryan may have been like, I'm at failure at 20 reps, 28-year-old Bryan or 35-year-old Bryan might have been able to eke out another 4 or something like that because you just know how to push that harder. And the other last thing I was going to say on this is that when you're in that hack squat or that pendulum or whatever it is, and you're at 1 to 2 RIR, I can still stay like pretty parasympathetic and pretty composed up to 1 to 2 RIR on those movements. Like, yeah, they're painful and I'm working hard and I'm focused, but going for that last rep where it's like, fuck, I don't know if I'm going to make it or not. There's a fight or flight response that's happening there that inevitably makes you extremely sympathetic. And it's not just a matter of stepping out of the machine and being like, whew, that was a set right there. It's like soul crushing. And so when you get to the point that you can do that to yourself, there's just a significant difference, in my opinion, on pushing compound movements to that level.
What a wonderful way to end the podcast. I have nothing else to add on to that one, but I think we did answer that very well.
That's all I got as well.
Cool. So as always, guys, thank you for listening, and thank you for everyone that submitted questions to Bryan's Instagram. As always, we will talk to you next week.